Hello, my name is Marianne Williams and I'm a dietetic ACP community gastroenterology dietitian working for Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. I'm going to take us through the tips on running a webinar for patients today, setting up your first webinar. Just want to tell you a bit about our team. We've got a fantastic team here in Somerset with Leah Seamark and myself and Kerry Marchant, Leslie Harper, and our new addition to the team is Olivia Radcliffe. And we're all involved in making the webinars for patients on our website, patientwebinars.co.uk. So an outline of what we're going to cover today, it's just going to be me talking today because it's just an educational webinar. And we're going to look at some helpful background information, planning the webinar, creating your presentation, running and recording a webinar live or on demand, outcome surveys, and marketing your webinar. So to give you some of the useful information, we have created, along with Jeremy Wilkinson from NHS Digital, a patient webinar framework for adoption, which gives you some very basic but very useful information on running de-branded webinars for national use. So originally, when we set up webinars, we would put our own Somerset logo on, and we realized actually that was completely crazy. We might as well make them generically NHS, so now they all just have an NHS logo on, so that any department nationally can use them. And that's been very successful. And this framework adoption from NHS Digital really emphasizes that it's very important if you're going to run webinars, that you make them available nationally rather than only for use in your area. Otherwise, it just encourages a reinvention of the wheel. There's an NHSX blueprint document for setting up webinars for patients, which NHSX produced last year. And there's more information on this on our website. And it gives some really good project summary tips and costs, etc., for setting up webinars as a project for your department. We've also got a research paper that was published last year on the feasibility, acceptability and cost efficiency of using webinars with patients, looking particularly at our irritable bowel syndrome data that we had coming out of the webinars, and we hope that you might find that useful as well. We've of course got our website, patientwebinars.co.uk, and if you scroll right down to the bottom of that page, you'll see a section for healthcare professionals, and it's got a bit of information about the team and about the project, guidance for creating webinars, and this video will be on that as well, and information for CCG business cases. We've got a very useful flow chart here for creating webinars, which gives you an idea of the amount of time that needs to be spent by a team making webinars, and will give managers who are trying to organise this within their team some idea of what's going to be involved. So how do you start? The only equipment you need, and this is the wonderful thing about webinars, is simply a laptop and a microphone. That is it. You need people, obviously, in a presentation, but as far as equipment's concerned, a laptop and a microphone. The example of the microphone we use is a Yeti, which is a professional podcasting microphone, costs about £120. This one is particularly good because it has different settings. So if you've got lots of people sitting around the microphone, they give equal amount of volume to that microphone. Whereas some of the cheaper microphones, you only hear the voice that's at the front of the microphone. So you can't sit around a table so easily. Obviously, at the moment with COVID, that's not so relevant because most people are recording on their own or with their own microphone. But hopefully when COVID passes, we'll go back to having a whole group of specialists around a table and recording a webinar together, in which case you need that microphone that has what we call omnidirectional ability. We also have organised an nhs.net email address, contact.webinars@nhs.net. And I would suggest that you also have your own email account that patients can contact you on with regard to webinars, etc., so that your department email system is not bogged down with stuff that comes from the webinars. Just keep it simple, keep the name very simple. And really, really important here is that staff making these webinars are going to need protected time. That is absolutely vital. This project takes time. Every webinar takes time, and you'll see from the flowchart just how much time is involved. And it's really important that staff have protected time to do this, and they're not trying to squeeze it in between things, because that just simply won't work and you'll get a very bad product. So planning the webinar. You've got to look at who the webinar is really being aimed at. Who is the target audience? It seems very obvious, but really nailing it down. You know, if you're doing celiac webinars, are you looking at celiac newly diagnosed webinars, or are you looking at celiac annual review webinars, or are you looking at bite-sized topics for celiac disease? So really look at who that webinar is particularly aimed at and hone it down. We always use patient surveys so that we can get information on what patients really want from the webinar. It's all very well us thinking we know what they want to know, and indeed we will have a pretty good idea because we'll have had the same sort of questions coming up in clinics. But there are also lots of other questions we wouldn't necessarily have thought about, and it's really important that we cover all that. There are different survey facilities like SurveyMonkey. Microsoft Forms has a free service as well. Questback, we use Questback within Somerset Foundation Trust. There are lots of different online survey facilities you can use. Check out the cost. We used to use SurveyMonkey very originally when we started in 2017. You used to get 100 responses free. Now you only get 40. So just be aware of that. I got caught on that recently. Make a list of frequently asked questions. So the frequently asked questions you think are going to come up along with those that come back from the survey from patients. Agree the title of your webinar. Now that might again seem very obvious, but it's so important that it's clear and simple. It says what it is on the tin. Don't make it complicated. Just make it very clear and simple what your webinar is about. You need to also look and see what panelists or experts you might need. So often we do webinars together as a team, but we also often do them with other healthcare professionals. So we might have consultant gastroenterologists or specialist GPs or specialist nurse practitioners, etc. Various people coming in on a particular subject to talk together about that and create a webinar together. You need a minimum of 2 people to run a webinar. And that's very important because you share the workload, but actually it's also very important because you're going to vary the voices. Listening to me throughout this webinar is going to get really dull, having the same voice the whole time. To make a webinar engaging, you need at least 2 voices, and it also gives that chance to interact and to get some chat going within the webinar to make it less automated sounding and more chatty. So really important you have at least 2 people and they can share the workload together as well. And then set a date for a practice session. Really important you have a practice session, go through it because you will have problems that you come across or slides you suddenly realize aren't as clear as you thought, or you need to add an extra slide in, or you just want to get used to talking through the presentation and practicing. Very important you have a practice session. And then set a very clear date for the live recording and give yourself plenty of time. I try and allow 3 hours for a practice session, 3 hours for recording, just because you never know what's going to happen. The amount of times I've had technological unforeseens happen just when we thought everything was going nice and smoothly. One webinar we had, it was an incredibly hot day and the internet went down at the other end where they were recording, and we just had to stop and reset the whole day. Now, obviously that's a little extreme, but you never know what's going to happen. So just always set a decent amount of time to run a live recording and a practice session. So creating your presentation, obviously this is absolutely fundamental. Now, when you create your presentation, we tend to use PowerPoint and we use templates. We have different colored templates. So this template's got the green outer edge, but we do different colored templates for the different subjects. And it's the same look, but just a different color. And we'll use that throughout the presentation. Now, we do not have live pictures, as you'll have gathered from this webinar, because we find that patients get very distracted. They're too busy looking at what your background's like and what books you've got on your shelf, etc. I'm sure everybody during COVID has become very aware of that phenomenon where you're trying to listen to somebody give a news broadcast and all you can look at is what pictures they've got on the wall behind them. So we don't have any live camera on. We do have that first slide there after the introduction is a picture of the people that will be speaking so that everybody knows who they are and where they're from, and that will say where they're from, so Somerset Foundation Trust in this instance, but again, as I said earlier, just the NHS logo in the top corner. And then we will also cover what areas will be covered in the webinar. And we use smart art on the PowerPoint presentation facility so that you can get these different colors and it just makes it look much more effective. Avoid lots of text or bullet points. You will need bullet points, obviously, but keep them succinct, keep them colored, keep them interesting looking, and minimize that text. You can talk around a bullet point. You don't have to have all the words in that bullet point. You just got enough to give you a reminder of what it is you're saying around that slide. Keep the slides very simple. Try and use lots of images if you can. We use Canva and they have free images on there, which is great. They're all copyright protected. You don't have to worry about the copyright. Canva does cost to have, but if as a department you're going to do webinars, it's worth every penny. I think it's about $9.99 a month or something. And you can create all sorts of things on Canva. And really importantly, they have this massive catalogue of photos that you can use free and images. And that's so important. Keep the presentation to about 30 minutes max if you can, depending what you're doing. You know, if we're doing bite sizes, we'd want them to be under 10 minutes. 20 minutes is good, 30 minutes really is a max. We do have longer ones like celiac disease newly diagnosed and the FODMAP diet, because they are very much treatment videos and it's the same amount of time as somebody would spend in clinic with that person. So I think it's really important. Those ones you will need extra time, but generally speaking, try and keep it to a max of 30 minutes, preferably 20. Avoid sounding robotic with a script. I really hate scripts. So I'm doing this webinar tonight. I'm not using a script at all. I'm just basically using the slides to direct what I'm going to say. You're the experts in your area. You know your information, otherwise you wouldn't be making a webinar on it. You don't need a script. You might use a storyboard where you've basically printed out a copy of all the slides and you've written on who's going to say what on what slide, roughly speaking, and you said who's going to be devoted to that particular slide. So you've got a storyboard idea of how the thing is going to move. But as soon as you start using a script, it starts to sound very robotic and can sound quite boring to listen to. Rearrange the division of slides really carefully. So there's just two of you doing it, or there's a group of you with specialists and experts coming in. Make sure everybody knows which slide they're going to be covering. Keep it chatty, as I said. When you're on air, ask questions to the panelists and experts. Ask each other questions, or something might come up in one of the slides. You might say, well, actually, yes, I had a very interesting case, and this was the case. So don't be afraid to interject with things that aren't on the storyboard, because that makes it more interesting. Pre-allocate which your team will answer certain questions. So if you've got a set of questions that you want to cover, so in those survey questions that you ask patients to give you an idea of what they want to know, you might create a selection of questions and answers, and you'll pre-allocate those to your team. So if somebody says, you know, I want to know, do I have to cut out all dairy on the FODMAP diet? Then you might say, I've had a question here. Somebody would like to know, do we need to cut out all dairy in the FODMAP diet? And you'll have pre-allocated the answer to one of your team. You'll then say, no, absolutely not. You don't need to cut out all dairy. You simply need to reduce the lactose in your diet, etc. So keep it chatty and put those questions in that you've been asked by patients to cover. And then decide on your downloadable information sheets. We have a lot of downloadable information sheets on our website and links as well. What is it that you want the patient to be able to access after they've watched the webinar? That's really important, because patients are looking for reliable, good information that they can download. So we'll have British Dietetics Association information sheets, we'll have links to really good articles, etc. So really important to make a good list of what you feel people should be able to download or links they might find useful. So what about running the webinar? Okay, you need to actually look at whether you're going to have a webinar service or a recording service. Now, there are pros and cons to both. A webinar service could cost you, I think it was costing us when we first, I can only talk about GoToWebinar as a webinar service because it's the only one we've ever used. It was extremely good, very efficient, but there are lots of other webinar services out there. So you just go out and have a look and look at the reviews on them. It costs at that point about £2,500 a year. So it is expensive, but there are benefits. We're now moving to using Zoom, and I'm recording this on Zoom, for instance, so you can record a presentation on Zoom, and you may be able to do that on other facilities like Teams. I don't know, I haven't used Teams, so have a look. And then you can record it and download it onto your computer free, so you're not paying for a service necessarily there. So it is really worth having a look and seeing what it is you want. If you're going to do a webinar, then you do and have it live streamed on a set date, a set time, then you do need a webinar service like GoToWebinar. Or are you going to run it on demand where you're just going to record the webinar and then put it up for people to watch whenever they want? So if you're running them live, we, as I said, use GoToWebinar. And the benefits of that are that you can do things like set up polls, which allow you to check whether somebody is really understanding what you're telling them during the webinar. They're very useful and very good, and you can do those with a webinar service. And it allows time for questions and answers. So you've got live questions and answers. People can type in questions and the panelists can answer those questions there and then. So that can be very useful indeed. And you can decide on downloadable information sheets. And I think GoToWebinar at the time we used it, you could have 5 downloadable information sheets attached to the webinar that people could download during the webinar. And then patients could access the webinar via the webinar service. So this was one of the hitches for us. So the reason I've got a picture of a little person with a laptop down there in the bottom right-hand corner is because somebody has to administrate sending out the link for the webinar to every single person that requests to attend. So people used to send us an email saying, I've heard about the webinar, please can you send me the details? And we would send out the webinar link to those people. But if somebody's got to administrate that, so that really needs to be borne in mind, that you've got to manage that. It's not automatic. So the second option, which is what we now do, having originally started with a live on-demand, a live service where we were running a webinar on a set day, at a set time, etc. We now do it a different way. We now record them on Zoom, as I said, so that they are available on demand. When you're making a webinar, you will make mistakes. You will absolutely make mistakes. You'll fall over words, you'll say something wrong. Just don't worry about it. Don't, whatever you do, if you're recording it, don't restart the webinar. Just carry on, because you can edit out those mistakes afterwards very easily. When you finish the webinar, so when I finished recording this now, Zoom will, I've set it to download onto my desktop. So it'll automatically download that video that we're recording now onto my desktop. And then I can take that recording and put it into an editing service and edit it. You can use iMovie, which is free on iPads and Macs, etc. One of our colleagues was using something called HitFilm because she was using a PC. I've not used it. I can't say what it's like, but she's produced some very good webinars with it, so it must be good. And then you've got your edited webinar, so you can then cut out the bits where you made mistakes and trim it a bit and tighten up. And if lots of people are going and ah, you can cut out all the little ums and ahs, and you can make it sound as though it moves and flows much more smoothly. And you can even chop it around and move sections of the webinar to different areas if that makes more sense in the flow. You can really play around with it, basically. You can even add in slides and add audio afterwards if you need to. So there's lots of things you can do with editing. And then once you've edited and you've finished working with that webinar, you can then send out the webinar for review. Really important that you send it out to people outside of your organization as well as inside your organization to get feedback. You will always get the unexpected. You'll think, oh gosh, yeah, that's a very good idea. We need to add that. And better to know now than before you upload it for public use. So that edited webinar, what we did is set up a YouTube channel, which we could then put the webinars on. Now that might sound scary. It's not. It's really, really simple to set up a YouTube channel, I promise. So just go onto YouTube and set up a channel, just name it. We named ours Patient Webinars for obvious reasons. So you then got a YouTube channel and you upload your videos as and when they arrive. And you can see here a series of videos. And you can use this little bit here. That's where you press that little picture and that will upload your latest video onto your channel. And then you get a page per video, and you can put here the description, the title, the description, and you can upload a little thumbnail, which is the picture you want to go at the front of the webinar so that you've got them all uniform and they all look the same. And you can even go in there and set hashtags and things so that people can find your webinars more easily. So you've got the title, the description, the thumbnail, and here you've got the video link. And that's the link that you're going to use to get people to your webinar. So what we do is we use that YouTube link and we put it onto our website. And there you can see Advice for Constipation, because we've put the link, that YouTube link, on our website, up comes the video, and then patients can just watch the video via our website. So the YouTube is really a storage space for all your videos, and just a place where you then link those YouTube links to your website, whatever website you're using, or if you just want to put links into text to send to people so they can watch it, however you want to do it, you've got a YouTube link that you can use in many, many different ways. We just choose to use it on our website. So decide also on what downloadable information sheets you want. So you can see here that we've got further information and handout sections, and we have a further information handout section for every single area that we cover on the website. And here you can see we've got links for handouts and links for people to click on as well. So let's look at outcomes. And these are really, really important. It's absolutely vital that you collect outcome data from the patients that are watching your webinars. Do they think they're good or bad? And what areas would they like to see more of, etc. Really get that feedback. You want to collect pre and post webinar data so that you can really see whether you have actually improved people's knowledge. Is the webinar doing what it should be doing? Is it getting anywhere near what they would get from an in-group session or a one-to-one session? You really need to know whether it's working. We use automatic surveys as a way of collecting outcome data. One bit of warning would be that you can set up surveys and survey questions through webinar software like GoToWebinar, but we found it very limited and not very useful. So we found it much better to use a proper survey service, because you want things like Likert scales, which are much more useful. And certainly the time we were using it, they didn't have that sort of facility on them. So data collection tools like SurveyMonkey, Microsoft Forms, Questback, etc., are much better to use. So the type of survey questions we've put on are things like, we want to know what age the attendees are, how likely you are to recommend the webinar to a friend, how easy was it for you to access the webinar. We want to know pre and post whether they're, for instance, with IBS, whether their IBS dietary knowledge has improved, whether they feel it's improved. Which of the following factors were important to you when choosing to attend a webinar? So was it the fact that they didn't have to drive anywhere? Was it the fact they could rewatch the webinar, etc., etc.? What would you have done if you'd not had access to the webinar? Really important to know that. Who gave you the details of the webinar? And we try and put a little test question in. And the one for IBS is, would you think that allergy testing would be useful for you to find a solution to your IBS? Now, allergy testing is absolutely no use at all, but a lot of people think it is. So they often say, yes, I think allergy testing would be useful. Once they've watched the webinar, we have a huge upsurge in people saying, no, we realize no, it's not useful. And the good thing about that is it proves that they A, listen to it, B, assimilate the information, and C, were able to now answer the question correctly. So I think it's really important to have one of those sort of questions in there so you can prove that people really did improve their knowledge. Here's some of our outcome data. So you can see that what age, this is for our IBS webinar, 1,171 people, and you see really nice spread of most age groups. So all the way up to 74 years old, we've got a really good spread between 25 and 74 years old. And I think that dispels the whole myth that actually you're going to alienate the older population by using webinars. That just simply wasn't the case. So 25 to 70-year-olds, all well represented. Which factors were important to you when choosing to attend the webinar? Well, by far the most important was access to accurate and reliable information. And I think we can all understand that in a world of Dr. Google, where there's and Instagram and Facebook and everything, where there's just endless rubbish put out about nutrition related conditions, people become really cautious about the information they're getting. And yet for them, they really felt confident that this was NHS information coming from specialists, not actors pretending, but actual healthcare professionals delivering the webinar. And I think that's another really important thing. I don't think it's the same if you've got actors delivering it. You really need those consultants and those specialists and the specialist dietitians and the specialist nurses. They're the ones that are dealing with these conditions all the time. They're the ones that should be speaking on this, and they're the ones that people trust to give them accurate and reliable information. So being able to rewatch the webinar was the next most popular reason. Now, I found that quite interesting because I didn't think people would have really cottoned onto that. Our population is much older in Somerset, it's very rural, it's not very IT savvy. And I thought, oh, they won't really cotton onto that. But absolutely they did. They loved the fact that they didn't have to walk out of the room with a consultant scratching their head going, what did he say? But that they could actually rewatch the webinar as many times as they wanted to consolidate knowledge. And that was really important to people. How would you rate your knowledge on how to manage your IBS? And you can see here the red bars are before and the green bars are after, and a huge uptick in 56% said they had fair, good or excellent knowledge before, and 95% said they had fair, good or excellent knowledge after the webinar. How likely are you to recommend the webinar to a friend? And this is out of 322 people. And you can see that 94% of people were likely to recommend the webinar. And this is what happened to our referrals into our dietetic-led gastroenterology service when we started the webinars. So it's cut into three sections here. The middle section is when we started the webinars in September 2017. And you can see a very steady, very dramatic decline in our referrals into our one-to-one service. And they only start to pick up when we actually start to accept celiac and IBD and remission referrals as well. So actually what happened is that we had a 45% drop in our one-to-one referrals in our specialist service within the first year of using the webinars, which was absolutely revolutionary and meant we could now dedicate more time to other areas of unmet need, like the celiac community and like the IBD and remission community as well. So if you're emailing or texting a webinar link, then send the survey links to the patient at the same time so that they get the survey and you get more chance of them filling it in. Just keep the whole process simple. We attach our survey links into our website. So here we've got the newly diagnosed celiac revised and updated for 2021. If you press play on that, it takes you automatically to the survey before they can get to the video. So it just means that we maximize the chance of them filling in the survey. So what about marketing? Well, marketing is really important because let's face it, you could have the best webinar in the world, but it's never going to get used unless people know it exists. So obviously these days, there are lots of ways of marketing things through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but also there's the letters that go out to patients from departments. So from our department and from both local hospitals, all the letters that go out from the gastroenterology departments will mention the patient webinars website at the bottom. And then it'll particularly mention it if it's relevant to that patient within the letter as well and direct them to the webinars and the website. We also have it in our pathway. So you can see here a small picture of our irritable bowel syndrome pathway. And patients are directed very rapidly to the webinars on the website. And we have a self-referral form on the website as well. So patients can self-refer in if they still feel they need help. And I think this is really important. Actually, we get very few of those self-referral forms back. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that if people feel they've got all the information is reliable and trustworthy, that many of them then don't really need to come into clinic. We also do business cards, little business cards with the patient webinars website on, very simple business cards, very cheap to produce. And the GPs give them out, the gastroenterologists, the endoscopy nurses, the clinic nurses. They're given out regularly to patients when they're diagnosed, and patients are asked, here, go to take this business card home, look up this website, and you'll find some webinars on there that are useful. And then we do email GPs regularly. We'll email them roughly once a month. And I was concerned that this would be overburdening the GPs, but actually many of them said, no, please keep sending us emails because otherwise we forget about the webinars. So there are lots of ways to market the webinars and make sure that they're used. And that gives you such a wonderful opportunity to catch really good outcome data. At the end of the day, you want to know, are these webinars effective in helping the patients? And marketing never stops. It's monthly reminders at least, making sure you're constantly putting it out there, what's happening, and reminding people that you've done a webinar on a certain topic. And the more people know, then the more word will spread. So just be patient. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't get lots of people watching your webinar immediately at all, but slowly over time, if you keep marketing it, you will find more and more people start to watch your webinar, and you get more and more feedback and more survey outcome data as well. But don't forget that staff absolutely need protected time to work on these projects. This is so important. If they don't get it, you're not going to get a good webinar. And the truth is that the webinars may cost you time initially, but once they're made, you only need to review them once a year. So let's say you review a webinar once a year. Once it's up there, it's working for you, it's all automated. So no staff are involved in the website. Patients go to the website themselves, they watch the webinars, they fill in the automated surveys, they download the information they need. So there's no mailing out stuff to patients, there's no booking appointments, there's no finding rooms to have appointments in. It's all very, very simple and manages itself. So very, very important that you do review the webinar, but other than that, that time that you let the staff have to make the webinar originally is worth every penny in the long run. So in summary, in our links below the webinar, you'll find that there is also extra tips for running a webinar, which has got some extra bits and pieces that we've discovered along the way and you may find useful. And I would really recommend downloading that. Feel free to download the published documents from NHS Digital and NHSX and our research that was published last year if you find that helpful. And then the main elements to look at are decide if you wish to run the webinar live or on demand. Keep presentations simple and avoid scripts if possible. Use the slides as your prompt. Ensure that all speakers have access to good microphones. Good audio quality is absolutely vital, really, really important. Don't worry if you make mistakes during the recording, as these can be easily edited out afterwards. Set up a YouTube account so that you have easy use links for patients. Set up surveys for patient engagement initially and then for collecting outcome data. Marketing your webinar is absolutely vital to ensure that patients and healthcare professionals are aware of it and that therefore it is actually used. No point in having this wonderful webinar if nobody uses it. And allow protected time for staff to create the webinars. So I hope you found a lot of these tips helpful and that it will help you to run your own webinars. And thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.